There's a kind of laughter that follows a man down a church aisle and never quite lets go of his boot heels. I heard it the day Caleb Hartwell married the old Maid. The whole valley heard it. They laughed because she was 9 and 30 and sharp-tongued, and had outlived every chance a woman was supposed to want. They laughed because he was a quiet widower with good land and could have had a girl half her age. What none of them knew, what I didn't know, standing in the back with my hat in my hands, was that the woman they were laughing at had already started counting the dead. She just hadn't told anybody yet who was doing the killing. By the time she did, the laughing stopped all at once, like a candle pinched between two wet fingers. Stay with me. I was there for the whole of it, and I've never told it straight until now. The bell over the church was still ringing when the first joke got made out loud, and I remember thinking the bell and the joke sounded about the same, both of them tinny, both of them carrying too far in the dry air. "Hartwell's gone and bought himself a schoolmarm," somebody said behind me. "Reckon she'll grade his kisses." A few men laughed. I didn't. Not because I was better than them, God knows I'd have laughed at anybody else, but because I worked Caleb's spread, and a man doesn't laugh at the hand that pays him, not where the hand can see. I'm Eli Marsh, by the way. I keep a tally book in my breast pocket, the same one I use for counting steers and tracking which cow's gone dry, and lately I'd taken to writing other things in it too, things that had nothing to do with cattle. I've got a bent nail I carry, a horseshoe nail somebody's hammer caught wrong, and when I'm thinking hard I roll it between my fingers till the skin goes shiny. I was rolling it raw that morning. The bride came out of the church into the white glare of noon, and the valley got its first long look at the woman it had already decided about. Adelaide Pryor, 39 years old, tall in a way that made men feel measured. She had a face that wasn't pretty the way the word usually means, too much jaw, too much steadiness in the eyes, but it was a face you'd want telling you the truth if you were dying. I didn't know yet how exactly right that thought was. She wore gray. Not the bridal kind of gray you choose to be humble, but the practical kind, the kind that says I have buried people and I expect to bury more. Her hands were folded in front of her, and I noticed, because I notice hands, you learn to, around horses, that the skin of them was stained faint green and brown at the fingertips, like a woman who spends her hours grinding things in a mortar. Caleb stood beside her, and he looked like a man who'd been handed something fragile and was afraid to breathe wrong. He was older than me by 15 years and quieter than any man I knew. His first wife, Sarah, had died of the fever 6 winters back, along with their daughter in the same week in the same bed. He'd worked the ranch in silence ever since. The valley had pitied him, then forgotten to. Folks have a budget for grief that isn't their own, and his had run out long ago. So when he announced he'd be marrying Adelaide Pryor, the spinster, the herb woman, the one who'd come west alone to teach school and never found a husband and was generally agreed to be too clever for her own good, the valley dusted off its pity and found it had curdled into something meaner. She'll outlive him out of spite, I heard. She'll lecture him into the grave. The thing about a cruel joke is how comfortable it makes the people telling it. They were all so easy that day, leaning on the fence rails, fat with their own kindness toward each other. And there stood Caleb and his bride in the middle of it, and Caleb's ears went red, and Adelaide's didn't. That was the first thing I wrote in my tally book that wasn't a number. Her ears didn't go red. I didn't have a reason for writing it. It just struck me that a woman being laughed at by a whole valley ought to flinch somewhere, and she didn't flinch anywhere at all. She looked out over the crowd the way you'd look over a herd, taking account, and her eyes stopped, for just a second, I swear it, on the Calloway baby in its mother's arms. I didn't think anything of it then. The wedding supper was held at the Hartwell place because Caleb had the room for it and because, I think, he wanted the valley to come stand in his house and feel a little ashamed under his roof. People are always best behaved in a kitchen that isn't theirs. We ate. The men drank. Adelaide moved through her new home like she'd lived there years, not hurrying, not asking where things were, just opening the right drawer the first time the way some people do. She didn't talk much. When she did, It was short and dry and a half-beat smarter than whoever she was answering, and I watched the men who'd laughed loudest in the churchyard go quiet around her one by one, the way cattle go quiet when a storm they can't see yet starts pressing on the air. Caleb watched her too. I'd never seen him watch anything but his own boots in 6 years. He watched her cross his kitchen, and something in his face that had been folded shut started, very slowly, to come unfolded. I'm not a romantic man. I want that on the record. But I have eyes, and what I saw that night wasn't a joke. It was two people who'd both been written off by the same valley, standing in the same house, deciding without a word between them that they were done being written off. It would have made a fine ending right there. The old maid and the widower last laughed theirs. If that's all it had been, nobody would need me to tell it. But here's the part the valley didn't see, because they were busy with their supper and their wine. Old Maud Calloway's baby wouldn't stop crying. It had been fussing all evening, that thin reedy cry bobbies get when something's wrong inside them and they don't have the words, which is all of them, all the time, I suppose. Maud kept jouncing it and shushing it and apologizing to nobody in particular. And along about the time the lamps got lit, the baby stopped crying, not the good way, where they wear out and sleep, but the bad way, where they go slack and gray and too quiet, and the mother's face changes before she even knows why. Adelaide was across the room. I watched her go still. I watched her set down whatever she was holding, and then she crossed that whole crowded kitchen, not fast, never fast, but in a straight line, the way water finds the low place, and she had the baby out of Maud's arms before Maud finished the word Adelaide. She turned the child toward the lamp, pressed 2 stained fingers under its little jaw, bent and put her cheek to its mouth to feel for breath, and then she did something I'll never forget, because it was the first time the whole valley got a true look at what kind of woman they'd been laughing at. She put her own mouth over the baby's nose and mouth and breathed for it. Just little breaths, her chest rising and the baby's rising after, borrowed breath hers into his. The whole room went silent, even the drunk men. Caleb stood up so fast his chair went over, and Adelaide breathed and stopped and pressed and breathed, and somewhere in there the baby gave a wet, ugly cough and started screaming, really screaming, the good way, the alive way, and the whole kitchen let go a breath of its own that you could have heard in the barn. Maud was crying and reaching, and Adelaide gave her the baby back gentle, and I saw that her hands were shaking now. Now they shook, not in the churchyard, not under the laughing, but now, with a live child back in its mother's arms, the steady woman's hands shook like a leaf in a creek. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist, and then she said the thing, quiet almost to herself, but I was close enough. "That's the 3rd one this month," she said. Maud didn't hear her, the men didn't, Caleb, righting his chair, didn't. But I did, and I wrote it in my tally book with my thumbnail still chewing on the bent nail in my other hand, and I looked at it written there, and felt the cold come up through the floorboards into my boots. That's the 3rd one this month. 3 bobbies. 3 times she'd been near enough to count. A woman doesn't say a number like that by accident. A woman says a number like that because she's been keeping it, the way I keep mine, in a little book, in a quiet pocket, waiting. I caught her eye across the room. She'd seen me hear her. For a long second she just looked at me, measuring, taking a count, and then she gave me the smallest shake of her head. Not now, not here. I gave her the smallest nod back. That's how it started between us before I even knew what it was. A number, a nod, and the cold coming up through the floor. The valley went home that night still chewing on its joke, satisfied, full, sure of itself. They thought the story of Adelaide Pryor was over, old Maid married off, ha ha, the end. I knew different by then. I just didn't know yet that the thing she was counting had a name, and that the name belonged to a man we all shook hands with, and that before the month was out it would cost more than a joke to say it out loud. I rolled that nail till my thumb bled, riding home in the dark. I wrote one more line by the light of my own window. She's not counting bobbies. She's counting somebody's mistakes. I was close, but I had it gentle. They weren't mistakes. The fourth child took sick 8 days later, and this time I was there when Adelaide stopped pretending it was God's doing. It was the Hadley boy, 4 years old, out at the place east of the creek where the new wells had gone in that spring. I'd ridden over to return a borrowed auger and found the yard full of that particular kind of quiet a house gets when there's a sick child in it, the dog not barking, the chickens shut up, even the wind seeming to slow down out of decency. Adelaide's buggy was already in the yard. Word had got around after the wedding supper that the new Mrs. Hartwell knew things. Funny how fast a valley forgets to laugh when its children start dying. I tied off and went to the door because it would have been strange to leave, and nobody told me not to come in, so I came in. She was on her knees by the boy's bed. He was small and gray, and his lips had a tint to them I didn't like, a faint blue at the edges like he'd been eating berries, except it was the wrong blue and there were no berries. Adelaide had her ear to his chest. Mrs. Hadley stood in the corner with both hands pressed over her own mouth, holding her own screaming in. Adelaide looked up at me, no surprise in it. Eli, good, I need water. There's the well, right? Not from the well. She said it flat and fast, and the flatness was what told me. Bring it from the rain barrel, the covered one on the north side, not the well. I went. I drew it from the rain barrel with my hands not entirely steady, and when I came back she was holding a tin cup to the boy's lips, and she took the rainwater from me, and that's what she gave him, slow, a sip at a time, talking to him low the whole while in that dry, steady voice. Not baby talk. Never that. She talked to him like he was a grown man she respected who happened to be 4, and the boy drank, and over the next hour, while the lamp burned down and the room filled up with the smell of tallow and fever sweat, and the mint she crushed under his nose to keep him breathing, the bad blue went out of his lips a shade at a time. He lived. I want to say that plain so you're not afraid through the rest of it. The Hadley boy lived. But 4 had taken sick, and only this one had Adelaide in the room in time, and the other 3 were in the churchyard, and Adelaide Pryor was done waiting. She took me outside into the dark, and she didn't waste words. Eli, you keep a book, I've seen you. What kind of book? Cattle mostly. I felt foolish saying it. Other things lately, things I notice. Did you notice the wells? Notice what about them? She crossed her arms. The cold was real that night, the kind of high desert cold that comes down hard once the sun quits and her breath fogged. 3 bobbies dead, 1 boy nearly, every one of them in a house with one of the new wells, the deep ones, the one Sutter's company dug this spring. She let that sit. Not the old wells, not the creek houses, the new deep wells, everyone. I knew the name. Everybody knew the name. Harlan Sutter, the land agent, the smiling man who'd come to the valley 2 years back representing the railroad's interests, the man who'd promised the rail line would come through and make us all rich, the man who'd been so generous about helping ranchers dig deeper wells when the dry years hit, financing them even, taking a lien on the land against the cost. A friendly man. He'd danced at the wedding. He'd raised a glass to Caleb and made a kind toast, and everybody'd clapped. You're saying the water's bad, I said. I'm saying the water's poisoned, she said, and I'm saying it didn't poison itself. I want to tell you I believed her right off. I didn't. That's the truth, and I'll keep telling you the truth even where it makes me look poor. I stood there in the cold and I thought, this is the clever spinster the valley warned us about. This is a woman so sharp she's cut herself, seeing murder where there's just bad luck and dirty water. I think she saw me think it. She'd seen men think it her whole life. She didn't argue. She did something better. She reached into her bag and brought out a folded paper, and inside the paper was a little dark crust of something, scraped, dried. From the inside of the Callaway pump, she said, and the Hadley one matches it. I have a friend who knows the land better than anyone in this valley. Knows every spring and every poison root in it, and she's never seen this come up natural. Because it doesn't, it's brought in. Somebody is putting it down the new wells. slow, a little at a time, enough to sicken, enough to kill the small ones first because the small ones are smallest. Why, I said, why would anybody? And then I stopped, because I'm slow but I'm not stupid, and I just heard myself say the word lien. She watched me get there. There it is, she said quietly. If a man can't pay his debt, the land goes to the man who holds the paper. And a valley full of grieving, frightened ranchers, ranchers burying bobbies, ranchers who'd start to believe their land was cursed or sick or unlucky. Those are ranchers who'll sell cheap and run. And then the railroad comes through ground bought for pennies, and somebody who already knows the line is coming gets very, very rich. Sutter, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Sutter, she agreed. Now here's the part that's hard to tell, because it's the part where I learned what this woman was actually made of, and it wasn't cleverness, though she had that. It was something worse to carry. It was that she'd known for weeks and hadn't been sure, and a woman who isn't sure can't accuse a powerful man of murdering children, because if she's wrong she's a hysteric, and if she's right and can't prove it she's dead, and all the while she's not sure. Children keep drinking the water. You could have stopped giving folks the rain barrel trick and just told everyone, I said. Stop drinking the wells, tell the whole valley. And tell them what? That the water's bad. Her jaw worked. Sutter would have an explanation by sundown. Bad rock, sour minerals. He'd dig a new well, look generous doing it, and put it down again 2 months later when the panic faded. I'd be the mad old maid who scared the valley over nothing, and he'd have proof I was mad because the bobbies would stop dying for a while right after I made my fuss. She looked at me and there was something terrible and tired in it. I have to catch him doing it, Eli, with the proof in his hand, or it's just a clever woman's story and they already know what those are worth. That was her moral weight and she'd been carrying it alone. To save the valley for certain, she had to let it stay in danger a little longer, long enough to spring a trap. Every day she waited, a child might drink. Every day she moved too soon, all of them might keep drinking for years. There's no clean way through a thing like that. There's only the way you can live with after if you live. She'd chosen, and the choosing had aged her in a way that 39 years hadn't. Tell me what you need, I said, and I was hers from that minute, whatever I'd thought in the churchyard. What she needed was eyes. Sutter put the poison down at night, she reckoned, working the wells when the houses slept, and she couldn't watch every well and she couldn't be a woman seen riding alone in the dark without the whole valley making it about something other than what it was. But a ranch hand, out checking fences, out hunting a lost calf, nobody questions that. I rode at night for 2 weeks. I watered my horse and didn't sleep and rolled that bent nail till the head of it wore smooth. And I want you to know about her friend, because Adelaide wouldn't let me leave her out, and she was right. Her name was Naltoya, of the people the valley called Apache and mostly called worse, and she lived with her band up in the breaks where the army hadn't yet bothered them, and the ranchers pretended not to know they were there. Adelaide had met her years back. The two of them, the only 2 women in 50 miles who'd rather know a plant than gossip about a neighbor, and they'd traded knowledge across a fence that everyone else in the territory called a war. Naltoya was the one who'd known the poison wasn't from this ground. She'd ridden a long way to look at that little dark crust, and she'd turned it in her fingers and said something in her own tongue, and then in English, careful, that it was a death that came in a wagon, not up out of the earth. The valley would have hung a man for sitting at her fire. Adelaide had sat at it for years. I think that tells you everything about why she didn't flinch in the churchyard. She'd stopped, a long time ago, caring what the valley laughed at. She'd buried that the way you bury anything that's only ever hurt you. It was Naltoya who first put eyes on the wagon. Up high, where she watched the valley the way you'd watch weather, she saw a covered rig come down at night to the Price well, 2 nights running, and she sent a boy down on a horse with no saddle to find me at the Hartwell place, and the boy wouldn't come in the yard, just sat his horse at the gate till I came out, and said one word, Price, and pointed north, and was gone before I'd got my own horse cinched. I rode. Caleb rode with me. I hadn't even told him the whole of it, and he came anyway, the way a quiet man comes, just took down his rifle and said, "Where?" Because Adelaide had told him enough, and because Adelaide was already gone ahead in her buggy with a lantern and a bottle of something stoppered tight, riding into the dark toward a man who'd killed 3 children to get rich, alone, to catch him with his hand in the well. I have never been so afraid in my life as I was on that ride, and most of the fear wasn't for me. The lantern was lit at the Price well when we came over the rise, and there was the wagon, and there was a man at the wellhead with something in his hands. And there, between him and the well, holding up her own lantern so it lit her face plain and unafraid, stood the old maid the whole valley had laughed at, saying in a voice that carried clear across the cold flat ground, "Go ahead, Mr. Sutter, pour it. I'd like the valley to see exactly what's in your hand." He almost did it. That's the thing I've turned over the most in the years since Harlan Sutter, caught dead to rights, lantern light on his face and a witness standing 10 feet off, very nearly poured that poison down the well anyway. Because some men, when they're cornered, don't get afraid. They get insulted, as though the world has been rude to interrupt them. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said it pleasant, he had the pleasantest voice. He had a packet in his hand, oilcloth, the size of a deck of cards, and he didn't put it away. "You'll catch your death out here." "Likely," Adelaide said. "Children do." I'd reined up in the dark beyond her lantern's reach, and Caleb beside me, and Sutter didn't know yet that there were 2 rifles in the night with his name in front of them. He thought he had a lone woman in the dark, miles from anybody, with a confession he could undo just by undoing her. I want to walk through it slow, because it happened slow, slower than fear lets you feel at the time. "You're not well, Adelaide," Sutter said, gentle as a doctor. "Everyone's remarked on it. A woman your age, married so sudden, riding out alone at midnight making wild talk about the wells. I'd hate for the valley to hear how far you've slipped." He took a step toward her. The packet stayed in his hand. "Why don't you give me that bottle you're holding and let me take you home to your husband?" "This bottle," she held it up. The lantern lit it amber. "This is from the Callaway pump. And this," she didn't take her eyes off him, and her free hand went to her bag and came out with the folded paper, "is what was crusted inside it, which a chemist in Santa Fe has already seen a sample of, and named and put in a letter, which is presently sitting in a lawyer's box in 3 different towns to be opened in the event of my death, which you are right now, Mr. Sutter, considering arranging." The pleasantness went out of his face, not all at once, in stages like a window frosting over. "You're bluffing," he said. "I buried 3 children," she said. "Do I strike you as a woman who bluffs about it?" "Here's where I should tell you I rode in like the cavalry. I didn't. I waited, because she told me to wait. Let him say it, Eli, make him say it where there's witnesses. A bottle's a bottle, but a man's own mouth is a rope. And so I sat my horse in the dark and let her stand alone in front of a murderer, and I have never hated a plan so much in my life as I hated that one while it worked. And it worked, because Sutter, insulted, cornered, certain he was still the smartest man on that flat dark ground, did what such men do. He explained himself. He wanted her to understand before he dealt with her that it had been reasonable. "It was 3 children," he said, and his voice had gone low and reasonable, and that was the worst sound I ever heard a human make. 3, against a rail line that'll move 10,000 souls and a fortune that'll build half this territory. You want to weep over 3 when I'm building the future. The land's wasted on these people. They scratch at it and starve. I'm doing them a mercy, buying them out, sending them somewhere they can." "You poison bobbies to lower the price of dirt," Adelaide said. "I made an investment," Sutter snarled, "in a valley that's too stupid to know what's coming." And he turned and lifted the oilcloth packet over the open mouth of the well. And Caleb shot it out of his hand. I'll tell you, I didn't even know Caleb could shoot like that. Quiet men keep things. The packet spun off into the dark, and Sutter screamed and grabbed his hand, and there were suddenly 2 riders coming into the lantern light with rifles down and level. And the smartest man in the valley stood there, clutching his stinging fingers and understanding, finally, all at once, that he had explained the murder of 3 children aloud to 4 witnesses and a chemist's letter and the wide, indifferent sky. We tied him to his own wagon wheel. Naltoya came down out of the brakes at first light, having watched the whole thing from up high, and she and Adelaide together pulled the recovered packet out of the brush with a stick and folded it away careful, evidence, and the 2 of them stood over it talking low in the gray dawn in a mix of 2 languages, and Caleb and I stood back and let them, because it was theirs. They'd carried it longest. It went to a real court in the end, 2 counties over, because there wasn't a jury in our valley that could have sat through it without lynching the man before the verdict. The chemist's letter came out of its box. The Hadley boy's mother testified. Adelaide testified for a day and a half, and the lawyers tried every door they had: bitter spinster, unstable woman, a wife testifying, an Indian's word, a ranch hand's tally book, and not one of the doors opened because she'd built the thing too well. She'd waited too long and watched too careful and counted too true. She'd refused to be a clever woman's story. She'd made herself a case. Harlan Sutter hanged. I was there. I didn't enjoy it. Adelaide didn't come. Now here's what I really want to leave you with, because the trial isn't the part that stays with me. It's after. The valley, see, had to do something with the shame of it. They'd laughed at her. They'd buried their own children while laughing at the one woman trying to save them. That's a hard thing to hold, so they did what people do. They turned it into a story where she was a hero and they'd always known it, always seen her quality, the wise woman of the valley, and they came to her now with their fevers and their birthings and their dying, and they called her Mrs. Hartwell with a warmth they'd never once spent on Adelaide prior. She let them. She never said a word about the laughing. She'd buried caring about that long ago, remember. But I saw her, one evening a year on. I'd come up to the house to settle accounts with Caleb, and I came around back where the kitchen door stood open, and there she was at the table grinding something in her mortar, and Caleb was across from her not doing anything at all, just sitting in his own kitchen watching his wife's stained green fingers work, the way he'd watched her cross that crowded room the night of the wedding. 2 people the valley had written off in the same house, in the lamplight. She looked up and saw me in the door, and she did a thing she'd never done in front of me before. She smiled. Not the dry half-smile she gave the valley. A real one, tired and crooked and private, that took 10 years off her hard face, and she said, "Eli, you still keeping that book?" I said I was. "Good," she said. "Somebody ought to write down what really happened. They'll get it wrong otherwise. They always do." So I have. This is it. This is what really happened. They laughed when he married the old maid. And the old maid breathed life back into a dying child with her own mouth, and counted the dead till she'd built a case no clever man could break, and stood alone in the dark in front of a murderer to make him say it out loud, and saved every soul in a valley that had laughed at her, and never once asked them to be sorry. Caleb died 8 winters later, quiet, the way he'd lived, with her hand on his chest feeling the last of it go. I was there for that too. She didn't cry where anyone could see. But that night I rode past the house late and the lamp was still burning, and I thought about going in, and I didn't, because some grief is a count a person keeps alone. I never did learn what she was grinding that last evening in the lamplight. I never asked. I think about it more than I should.